Welcome back, strategic angling fans. This is episode 30-something. My name is Brady Hanna. This is JJ Patton, and I am also joined by Tim Himsl, special guest here tonight. We have an exciting episode planned for you. We're talking about boat care, what to do when you do certain things. Tim's the resident expert on those things, so we're looking forward to hearing all about that. JJ, I know you normally give us history, but maybe you could give us some colorful history of.
Yeah, I can give you a lot of history of boat problems. I've had several. I've also been witness to several of yours, and that's why Tim came over tonight to help inspect some. We thought maybe it would be a good idea, since we did the bank fishing one for the bank guys, let's do something for the boaters. What kind of things you can do, how you can kind of take care of your stuff on your own, so that you don't have to rely on calling Tim whenever something goes wrong. So that's kind of what we were going to do tonight. Since we live on the river,
and the water's very low.
The water's low this year, so it's there's a lot of potential bumping and rubbing that occurs. Sandbars, stumps, rocks, you name it, we're hitting it. So we're just going to kind of throw some questions by Tim and see what he had to offer you guys.
Tim, maybe do a proper introduction of himself.
Yep, I'm Tim Himsl. I work at Grace Marine in LeClaire, Iowa. I've been doing boat mechanics for about 5 years now. I'm certified in Yamaha outboards.
And Mercury's too, when you might hurt mine, right?
Yeah,
Perfect.
And he's a fine fisherman in his own right. He does quite well in the local circuits. Actually runs the Tuesday nighters that we fish. So appreciate you guys doing a good job with that too.
My pleasure.
So what's our first question here, JJ?
Well, the first thing I was thinking is, what should a guy do, like a average dude like me, every trip? If I'm going on a trip, I'm taking my boat, what should I do to make sure that everything's ready to go? Any, tightening bolts and inspecting stuff?
So, number one thing I'd say, if you're going on a long trip with your boat, first thing you got to worry about is the trailer. You're not going to get it there without a trailer rolling. So inspect your bearings, make sure you grease them properly. Check your tires, make sure there's no dry rot on them, that they're going to blow up halfway there. No one wants to be on the side of the road changing a tire. So tires, bearings, you're not going to get there without them. Number one on any sort of trip. Tie downs are very important. Make sure that your boat is pulled all the way up on the trailer before a long trip. You don't want it bouncing around causing any damage. Check your straps on the back of the transom as well. Make sure they're tight. So anything that we can do to stop an accident from happening is well worth checking.
And consider maybe having a hub for your trailer on hand.
Sure.
I have currently got JJ's in my truck.
Personally experienced that.
Yeah. Coming back from Florida, I got stuck near Gunnersville and was not prepared. Had to pay heavily for my unpreparation.
Sure.
So, what else you got?
Anything for the boat other than we were laughing about making sure you put the plug in. That's kind of a no-brainer, non-mechanical thing.
Sure.
But everybody's forgot. I think it's nice kind of when you pull up to the ramp to have a little checklist that you unhook the straps. Mm-hmm. Some guys don't like unhooking their bow. I think most of the trailers these days will hold a bass boat, even on most ramps. But obviously you don't want it sliding off the back, so don't do any erratic jerking.
Nobody wants to sit at a boat ramp watching some guy prep his boat. So before you pull up and you're lined up to back your boat in, make sure the back straps of the boat are off. Make sure your bow eye is unhooked if that's how you like to unload your boat. Make sure your key is in the ignition, ready to start your motor. Make sure your batteries are switched on if there's a battery shutoff switch. So that when you or your partner that you're with is going to back the boat in the water, it is ready to start the engine and get it off and get out of the way as soon as possible. Everybody at the lake or river will really appreciate that.
Yeah. And I would advise practicing that too. Practice back in a trailer in a Walmart parking lot or something. Just it took me a long time. I'm by no means an expert, but to get to learn how to use the mirrors, I think is really key on trailer ramp etiquette. Because if you start turning around, you start jackknifing trailers and stuff, and I think
you've lost it. You've lost it if you're turning around.
Yeah, exactly.
It's over.
All right, so you get ready, you're going on the trip. I'm getting ready to put gas in my boat. What kind of gas should I put in my boat tank?
Great question. So let's break it down to two different engines right now. Do you either have a 4-cylinder, engine, a smaller engine, or do you have a V6? Most of the V6 engines on the market right now require an 89 octane. All Yamaha V6 engines in particular require 89 octane. No ethanol is preferred. Use what you can. So, like I said, anything smaller than a V6, 87 octane. Anything higher, 89. Ethanol is everywhere. If you can avoid it, great. If you can't, use some sort of fuel stabilizer. Yamaha Ring Free Plus is a great one. There's all sorts of great fuel stabilizers out there.
And those do help. Those
absolutely. Okay. Not only do they help stabilize the ethanol, but they also help clear carbon out of your engine. That's going to hurt the performance of it. So all that stuff absolutely helps.
So I've heard of some guys, if you run ethanol, something happens with water building up, and they'll put a water filter in their fuel line or some kind of
water separating fuel filter helps with that. It's in the business we call it a canister filter. It's inside the boat, so before the gas actually goes from the gas tank to the motor, there's a canister filter in order to collect any water deposits. And that's something that's an annual change. You can dump, if you had an issue with your motor on the water, you can dump it out into a bucket or something.
Yeah.
But most boats these days are equipped with a water fuel separator that's going to stop any issues from happening like that.
I think maybe I should ask the next question there.
Yeah, that's a good one for you.
Let's say you hit something, Tim.
Oh, geez.
Let's just say it happened. Water was low. You hit something.
Yeah.
What is the stop, drop, and roll of hitting something on the water? The river, it's very common. Very common. It can happen to the best of us.
It can happen to anyone.
It can happen to anybody.
Yeah.
What happens? What should we do?
So I hit something on the water. This is what I'm going to do. So you hit something hard. Let's say. You're like
50 miles an hour.
That was bad.
Yeah.
All right. Shut your motor off. Step one, if it didn't shut itself off.
Yep.
Trim the said motor up. Look at the motor. Inspect for damage. Look at your prop. Look at your prop shaft if you can. Make sure there's nothing crazy going on, like your blade's bent over or your lower unit's gone. Don't know anyone that's happened to recently.
My lower unit was still there. Most of it.
Yeah.
Some of it.
So inspect your lower unit. Try to figure out what hit, what happened. All right. So let's lean over, maybe spin your prop. Make sure you don't see a big wobble in it. Everything looks great. Awesome. Trim your motor back down. Start the engine. Make sure it doesn't sound funny. Nothing's missing. Nothing's shaking. Put it into gear. Idle. If you don't feel any crazy vibrations, awesome. Take it easy, get it back to the ramp, have it inspected by a marine dealer of some sort that can verify that you didn't mess anything up. When you get back home, if you're mechanically inclined, draining the gear lube and checking for any water penetration is always a good idea. Make sure you didn't lose a seal or something like that, because losing a lower unit is a really bad day.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I had a couple of stories like that. I had one time when I first got my Triton, I hit some rocks fairly hard, and there was some prop damage, but the prop shaft looked good and everything looked pretty good, and so I put a new prop on. It seemed to run pretty good. It wasn't really wobbling. Well, come to find out, about a month later, I'm driving down the channel, all of a sudden the boat just wow, and well, I guess I'd knocked a tooth off of the gear, and I think maybe that after you knock one off, then they just keep knocking more and more off.
Yeah, they kind of stay in there and work their way around.
And I had another time where I hit something, and I guess I knocked my seal out because when I took my lower unit in to get it looked at, a bunch of rusty water came out instead of oil, and that wasn't very good either. So it happens.
Yeah, you're not the only one.
Yeah.
I have a whole pile of scrap lower units out back saying people hit stuff in the river.
So talking about props, how do you decide what prop? There's a lot of talk about people look at your boat, hey, you need to put a 25 pitch on there, or you need to put a 4-blade on there. How do you decide which prop is the best for your particular boat?
Yeah, and maybe give a little background on what a 4-blade versus 3-blade or the pitch even means.
Yeah, try my best here.
Okay.
And it's a great question because people need to get their boats propped out correctly, and it's a challenge. So let's say Brady's boat behind us here, this Nitro, whatever, Z21 thing. Let's just say hypothetically he's running a 25 pitch Tempest on it, and he's getting 5,900 RPMs out of it at wide open throttle. So we're going to say, well, your motor can run 6,100 RPMs at wide open throttle, so let's bump it down a pitch. So every pitch you bump down on a stainless steel prop is approximately 200 RPMs you're going to gain. So we're going to go from a 25 pitch to a 24 pitch. And again, we're going to go from a 3-blade to a 3-blade on this scenario. And hopefully that'll gain him the 200 RPMs that he needs to get closer to his wide open throttle range and get a little extra speed out of it and a little extra torque out of it. So that's kind of the scenario you got to play, and vice versa. If you are spinning too many RPMs and you're hitting the rev limiter, you're gonna have to go up a pitch.
And what's the benefit of because I have a 4-blade and I also have a 3-blade.
Sure.
They drive differently.
Yeah.
Why is that?
What I've seen between a 3-blade and a 4-blade, you're gonna get a lot more stability out of a 4-blade than a 3-blade. You're gonna keep more prop in the water as it rotates around. But you're typically not going to get as much speed out of a 4-blade as a 3-blade.
That's
so
been my experience.
Hole shot, you're going to get better hole shot out of it, but you got to weigh your sacrifices to your gains on that. So if you're looking for top end, 9 times out of 10, it seems like a 3-blade is the way to go.
And I think rough water, I think a lot of guys that drive on Lake Erie, and they prefer 4, and even they make a high 5 for Mercury. I know that has 5 blades on it. I think that's better when you're going in those big waves because it just grabs more water.
The grab. Yeah, exactly, the grab of it, keeping the prop in the water. So if you're in big waves, rough water, yeah.
So the other thing I think guys will say is, my top end's really fast, but my hole shot's not very good. That would mean they'd have too much prop, correct? I mean,
correct.
When you run a bigger pitch prop, it's harder to get out of the hole, but your top end will be better.
Exactly, and I promised Brady I wouldn't get into this, but weight distribution also factors into that as well.
Little dig. That's a little dig, folks. From the funny man.
But and then again, there's so much to it. 2-stroke engine versus a 4-stroke engine. 2-stroke engine relies on RPMs to get it out of the hole versus a 4-stroke engine has so much torque that it just kind of pulls itself out of the hole. But yeah.
And the other thing about props is, props also need care and maintenance. I've, looking at my 4-blade, which I ran predominantly all season, it's not as fast as it was. I can't get the same top end speed. Like I couldn't even get the nose of the boat off the.
And you've hardly hit anything.
And I've hardly hit anything.
So
I've barely made contact.
Yeah, and props get worn down over time.
Light touch.
So I'm just saying, if you notice your boat's driving differently after a season or 2 seasons, you might need to get your properly tooled. You might look at a new
Check
prop.
your prop, make sure the cupping isn't getting worn out of it. You might need to send it in and have it recupped, retuned.
Yeah. My 4-blade needs that
Probably.
And most of those prop guys, like Mark Croxton in Indiana, and then there's a guy, Gary Linden, up in Dubuque, for those that are around here. Those guys are pretty good about, if you say, hey, I'm not getting bow lift, or I'm not turning as many RPMs as I want, they can finagle that prop into a thing. You give them all your information, RPMs, boat, motor, all that stuff, and they can kind of help customize your prop to your boat. And this is a true custom job, not like the ones we do sometimes.
With a hammer and a piece of wood.
I've got one thing to add on boat maintenance. After you hit something, hypothetically again, we checked my jack plate and it is now a little bit loose after seasons of use. They come, those are just bolts. Is that another thing you'd add to your maintenance list a couple times a season?
I could sit here for an hour telling you about boat maintenance. Yeah. We need to check on it.
But that might be one that people don't think of.
So yeah, and for instance, Brady asked me, he's like, does my jack plate look good? I hit something. Is there any play in it? I said, well, let's take a look at it real quick. I took the motor, shook it, and you could see the play in the jack plate where it's separating slightly. You need to tighten your bolts stretch. Same thing with transom bolts. Your transom bolts could be stretching as well. That's all stuff you need to take a look at annually, if not more than that. I've seen transom bolts snap. You wouldn't look at a 3/4 inch bolt and think it's going to break, but it absolutely can. So yeah, be mindful. That's a lot of weight hanging off the back of your boat, especially if you're going to hang shallow water anchors off that as well. So check that often.
That's a good segue into, that's part of my annual thing is I walk around and make sure the bolts are tight and make sure everything looks normal. So if you actually just look at stuff, a lot of times you'll see, hey, there's a screw hanging out here or whatever. But what do you do to winterize your outboard in addition to looking at your boat and your trailer bearings and everything like that is kind of what I do. But what do I do on my own to winterize? Do I have to fog the motor and all this stuff that you read about, or?
Yeah, absolutely. And as we're rolling into fall here, we're starting winterizing. So number one thing on any outboard for winterization is the lower unit itself. Make sure you drain the gear lube at the end of the season when you're done with it. If you were to have lost a seal during the season, if you were to hit something and got a little water in there, that'd be bad news if it froze during the winter. So if you're not storing your motor in a heated building of any sort, and make sure you drain the gear lube out, check for water penetration. And a lot of old timers, they say they drain the gear lube out and refill it in the spring. I'd say it's better to just refill it right then and there so you don't forget. So once we got the lower unit done, a lot of guys will fog their engines, pull the spark plugs out, spray fogging oil in there and run it till it dies. And it's kind of optional. It's more of an older 2-stroke thing. But number one thing is getting fuel stabilizer in the engine. So get fuel stabilizer in the gas tank itself. Make sure you run your motor for an extended period of time with that fuel stabilizer in it so it works through the entire fuel system of the engine, so that in the springtime when you go to run your motor, you're not dealing with stuck injectors or whatever it may be, clogged up carburetors.
Do you use the same fuel stabilizer for winterizing that you would use each time you fill if you're using ethanol, and the same concentration or different?
You want to use a heavy concentration for winterizing. It usually says on the back of the bottle for long-term storage, this is what you do versus an everyday application depending on the brand. At Grace Marine, we exclusively use Star Bright storage stabilizer. And it works great. It has a fogging agent built into it, so it actually fogs the engine and it conditions the fuel for the winter. I think it lasts 6 months or something like that.
And tell us about gas tank. Full, empty, half full? What do we do in the winter?
It's definitely an argument. If you have gasoline in your gas tank that is non-ethanol, I would say fill it. If it's gasoline, if you have no access to non-ethanol gas, ethanol breaks down. Even with fuel stabilizers, it's going to break down. If you don't think you're going to use your boat in the next 6 months, I'd say as little gas as you can get in the tank. The reasoning for filling your tank is to prevent condensation building up inside your tank. So got to weigh the pros and the cons there. The non-ethanol gas, fill her up.
Sure. I got one other thing that came to mind. Just before you go on a trip, check your check your battery terminals. Those things come loose too, and those have killed a trip for me in the past. Not having those good and tight, especially on my trolling motor, that can be really bad on your batteries, can be bad on your electronics. That's another thing that I try to check before big trips, is really tightening down those bolts on the trolling motor power, because without trolling motor your trip is...
Electrical's a big deal on a boat, and we should probably do a whole segment on that.
Yeah, not only is it a pain in the butt, but then you run a risk of throwing a spark, and there's 52 gallons of gasoline sitting 2 feet away from where that spark occurred. That could be a real bad thing that could happen.
Absolutely. With today's trolling motors and dealing with 36 volts, you need to make sure that's tight. You're welding with 36 volts.
Yeah.
It's a lot of power.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Tim, anything else you want to add before we kind of wrap this up? Really appreciate you joining.
Thanks, man.
Anything you want to add? Say, scare somebody straight.
If there's anybody out there watching the video that has any further questions, again, I'm Tim over at Grace Marine in LeClaire. Give us a buzz. If you need help winterizing your boat, we're there, ready for you. So
they do a good job with boats, and they got a lot of not only bass boats, guys, but pleasure boats and pontoons and jet skis and all kinds of stuff over there. So
we do it all.
You can get a fishing ski and make your wife happy, but still get a new boat. You know?
Absolutely.
I've skied a kayak on my boat before.
Yeah.
All right, guys. We will see you next week sometime. It's kind of been a little regular on uploads, but Tuesday or Thursday it seems to be the trick. But we'll see you next week. This is another episode of Strategic Angling presented by K&K True Value in Bettendorf, Iowa. And we'll catch you next week.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.